Black pilot's courageous flight alters passengers' lives forever. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Captain Marcus Washington's normally steady voice wavered slightly over the intercom as the plane lurched again. We're experiencing severe turbulence and have lost one engine. I need everyone to remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. A collective gasp filled the cabin as the aircraft dropped suddenly, like an elevator with snapped cables. Oxygen masks deployed, dangling like yellow orchids above terrified faces. The floor trembled beneath their feet. In the cockpit, Marcus gripped the controls, his dark hands steady despite the chaos. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The altimeter was dropping too quickly. Sweat beaded on his brow as he made split-second calculations. "Sir, we need to divert now," First Officer Peterson urged, his face pale. "Denver's too far with this weather and one engine." Marcus glanced at the radar showing the massive storm system. The small regional airport to their left was their only option, but he knew what awaited him there. The same town where, just 5 years earlier, he'd been denied service at a restaurant. The same town where his father had once been beaten for looking a white man in the eye. In seat 14C, Alina Porter, a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, clutched her rosary. Across the aisle, Richard Kensington, the airline's aging owner and CEO, white-knuckled the armrests, his usual composure shattered. "We're all going to die because they let a black man fly this plane," Richard shouted to no one in particular, loud enough for several rows to hear. Marcus' voice came through the speakers again, resolute now. "This is Captain Washington. I've made the decision to divert to Lakeside Regional Airport. We will be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Trust me, I will get you home safely." The plane banked hard to the left, the failing engine screaming in protest. A flight attendant was thrown against the bulkhead, blood streaming from her forehead. Below them, lightning cracked across the darkened landscape, illuminating the small town of Lakeside, a place where Marcus had sworn never to set foot again. Richard Kensington's face contorted with rage and fear. "This is a death sentence," he spat, but Marcus Washington had made his choice. The lives of everyone aboard depended on him landing this crippled aircraft in the one place he feared most. The plane descended through violent air currents, the ground rushing up to meet them. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Captain Marcus Washington walked confidently through Midway Airport in Chicago, his pilot's uniform crisp and his posture military straight. 3 hours earlier, the departure lounge at Chicago's Midway Airport hummed with the usual pre-flight activity. Passengers waited in various states of impatience, some reading newspapers with headlines about President Carter's struggles with inflation, others thumbing through dog-eared paperbacks or watching children who raced between rows of molded plastic seats. Captain Marcus Washington strode through the terminal, his pilot's cap tucked under his arm. At 45, Marcus carried himself with the disciplined bearing of his previous career as an Air Force pilot. 20 years of military service, including 2 tours in Vietnam, had left him with impeccable credentials and a quiet determination that had helped him break barriers in commercial aviation. He was one of only 17 black airline captains in the country, a fact that filled him with equal parts pride and exhaustion. "Captain Washington," called out Sophia Reyes, the lead flight attendant for today's flight to Denver. Sophia, a woman in her late 30s with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense efficiency, had been flying with Marcus for nearly 3 years. "Schedule change. We're on gate 17 now, and they've moved departure up by 15 minutes. Marcus nodded. "Thanks, Sophia. Any word on our first officer today?" "Peterson. Young guy, first month with the airline," Sophia replied, falling into step beside him. "And just so you know, we've got the big boss on board today." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Kensington. The very same Richard Kensington himself, flying coach. PR stunt, apparently, showing solidarity with the regular folk during fuel shortages and fare hikes." Sophia rolled her eyes. "He's already made a fuss about the delay on his connecting flight." Marcus' expression remained neutral, but inwardly he sighed. Richard Kensington was the 68-year-old CEO of Transcontinental Airways, the airline that had, after much resistance, finally hired Marcus 2 years ago. Kensington represented the old guard of aviation, men who believed the cockpit was no place for anyone who wasn't white and male. "I'll be sure to give him an extra smooth ride," Marcus said with the hint of a smile. At gate 17, First Officer James Peterson was already reviewing the flight plan. Peterson looked up as Marcus approached, his baby face making him appear even younger than his 26 years. "Captain Washington," Peterson said, standing a bit straighter. "It's an honor, sir. I've heard great things." Marcus shook the young man's hand. Good to meet you, Peterson. First time on this route. Yes, sir. First time flying anything bigger than a Cessna until I joined Transcontinental, actually. Peterson's earnestness was apparent, and Marcus made a mental note to keep a close eye on him during the flight. We'll do the walk around together, Marcus decided. Let's head to the aircraft. As they walked toward the jet bridge, Marcus spotted a leaner porter sitting near the gate, her silver hair neatly styled, flipping through a copy of Reader's Digest. He recognized her immediately. She had been his 7th-grade English teacher back in Detroit, a woman who had encouraged his love of reading and mathematics when other teachers had written him off. She was the first white person who had ever told him he could be anything he wanted. Marcus detoured slightly. Mrs. Porter, Eleanor Porter. The elderly woman looked up, confusion giving way to recognition. Marcus Washington, my goodness. She beamed, rising shakily to her feet with the help of a wooden cane. Look at you, a captain. All thanks to you, Mrs. Porter, Marcus said warmly. If you hadn't pushed me to join that science competition in 7th grade nonsense, she interrupted with a wave of her hand. You were always brilliant, I just didn't let you hide it. She peered at him more closely. Are you flying this plane? Yes, ma'am, to Denver. Well, now I know I'm in good hands. She smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. I'm visiting my daughter and her family, first grandchild. Congratulations, Marcus said sincerely. We'll get you there safely, I promise. Meanwhile, across the waiting area, Richard Kensington observed the exchange with narrow eyes. At 68, Kensington had built Transcontinental from a regional carrier into the nation's 5th-largest airline. His silver hair and tailored clothing, even when dressed casually for this coach flight, bespoke wealth and privilege. He turned to his executive assistant, Thomas Webb, a man 20 years his junior who carried both their briefcases. That's Washington, isn't it? Kensington asked, nodding toward Marcus. The affirmative action hire from last year? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. He was hired 2 years ago, sir, and his record is impeccable. Military honors, more flight hours than most of our senior pilots. Kensington made a dismissive sound. The board pushed that diversity initiative through while I was recovering from my heart surgery. I still say the cockpit is no place for social experiments. Sir, Thomas began carefully, Captain Washington has the highest passenger satisfaction ratings in the company, and his safety record, spare me the HR propaganda, Thomas. I know what sells tickets and what builds passenger confidence. It's not he stopped himself, aware they were in public. Just make sure you've got the quarterly projections ready for me to review during the flight. At the check-in desk, another passenger was creating a small scene. Michael Townsend, a traveling pharmaceutical sales representative in his mid-30s, was arguing loudly about his seat assignment. I specifically requested an aisle seat, he insisted to the gate agent, Sarah Chen. I've got a bad knee from college football. I need to stretch it occasionally. Sarah tapped at her computer terminal patiently. I understand, Mr. Townsend, but the flight is completely full. The best I can do is ask if someone might be willing to switch once you're on board. This is ridiculous, Michael fumed. I'm gold status. That's supposed to mean something. Sophia, who had been reviewing the passenger manifest nearby, approached with a professional smile. Mr. Townsend, I'm Sophia Reyes, your lead flight attendant today. I'll personally see what I can do about finding you an aisle seat once we're boarded. We want to make sure you're comfortable. Michael's anger deflated somewhat in the face of Sophia's calm efficiency. Thank you. I appreciate that. As the passengers began to form a line for boarding, Marcus and Peterson completed their external inspection of the aircraft. The Boeing 737 gleamed in the morning sun, its Transcontinental Airways logo freshly painted. She looks good, Marcus commented as they checked the landing gear. Maintenance replaced the weather radar yesterday, Peterson noted, consulting his clipboard. Oh, and there's a note here about a slight irregularity in the starboard engine during the last flight. They checked it out and cleared it, but suggested keeping an eye on the temperature gauge. Marcus nodded, making a mental note. Always trust your instruments, Peterson, but verify with your eyes and ears. An engine will often tell you it's sick before the gauges catch up. Yes, sir. Peterson looked at Marcus with undisguised admiration. My dad was military too, Air Force like you. He would have loved to see commercial aviation open up to black pilots. Would have, Marcus asked gently. He died in '72, training accident. Peterson swallowed hard. He wanted me to fly, though, made me promise. Marcus placed a hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. Then let's make him proud today. As they boarded the aircraft through the rear service door, the maintenance crew was finishing up. The lead mechanic, a heavyset man named Frank Willis, gave Marcus a respectful nod. She's all yours, Captain. Weather looks clear to Denver, though there's a system building over Nebraska that might give you some chop about halfway there. Thanks, Frank. Anything else I should know? Frank hesitated. That starboard engine's been running a little hot lately. Nothing outside parameters, but worth keeping an eye on. Noted, I'll baby it a bit. Inside the cabin, Sophia and the other two flight attendants, Jennifer Lewis, a recent hire in her 20s, and David Kim, a seasoned professional in his 40s, prepared the galley for the 2-hour flight to Denver. Full flight today, David informed Marcus as he passed. 156 passengers, including the boss man himself. So I heard, Marcus replied. Let's give everyone the smoothest ride possible. In the cockpit, Marcus and Peterson began their pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Marcus had always found comfort in the rituals of aviation, the checklists, the procedures, the predictable sequence of events that preceded every takeoff. In the cockpit, he wasn't a black man in a white industry. He was simply a pilot, judged by his skills and decision-making alone. Hydraulic pressure normal, Peterson called out. Confirmed, Marcus responded. Electrical systems, all green. They continued through the checklist as the first passengers began boarding. Through the open cockpit door, Marcus could hear the usual shuffle and commotion of people finding seats and stowing luggage. Down in the cabin, Alina Porter settled into her window seat in row 14, carefully arranging her purse and a small bag of knitting. She smiled at the memories evoked by seeing her former student in the captain's uniform. Marcus had been a bright, serious child, always with a book about airplanes or space. She remembered how he'd once been accused of cheating on a math test because his white teacher couldn't believe he'd scored perfectly without assistance. Alina had defended him fiercely. Across the aisle from Alina, Richard Kensington took his seat, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the confined space of economy class. Thomas sat beside him, already opening his briefcase. Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable if we'd flown first class, Thomas suggested quietly. That would defeat the purpose of this PR exercise, Kensington replied tersely. The board wants me to show I understand the average customer experience, so here I am experiencing it. He shifted in the narrow seat. God, these are tight. Are we really making them this small now? Fuel efficiency, Thomas explained. Every pound matters with these gas prices. Kensington pulled out his reading glasses and the quarterly report. Well, at least walk me through these projections while we wait. A few rows ahead, Michael Townsend was still standing in the aisle, looking disgruntled at his middle seat assignment. Sophia approached him discreetly. Mr. Townsend, I haven't forgotten about your seat situation. Let's see if anyone might be willing to switch once everyone's aboard. Michael nodded, somewhat mollified. As he waited, his attention was caught by Jennifer Lewis, who was helping an elderly passenger stow a bag in the overhead compartment. Michael's expression softened as he watched her. Jennifer was attractive in a wholesome way, with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. In the rear of the aircraft, David Kim dealt with another minor crisis. A mother traveling alone with twin toddlers who were already showing signs of pre-flight restlessness. Ma'am, why don't we move you folks to these 2 rows here? David suggested, pointing to empty seats near the back. That way the kids can have window seats across from each other and no one will mind if they need to move around a bit. The mother's relief was palpable. Thank you so much. This is our first flight and I was so worried about disturbing people. We've all been there, David assured her with a kind smile. I've got 3 of my own at home. As the boarding process neared completion, Sophia made her way to Michael Townsend again. Mr. Townsend, good news. We have an aisle seat in row 21 if you'd like to move there. Michael glanced back at row 21, which was in the last section of the plane. That's near the restrooms, he pointed out, frowning. It is, Sophia acknowledged, her professional smile never wavering. It's the only aisle seat available. Would you prefer to stay in your assigned seat? After a moment's consideration, Michael sighed. No, I'll take the aisle. My knee will thank me, even with the bathroom traffic. Excellent choice, Sophia said, as if he'd just selected a fine wine rather than a less desirable seat. In the cockpit, Marcus received clearance from the tower for pushback. Transcontinental 457, you are cleared to push back from gate 17. Wind is 270 at 8 knots. Transcontinental 457 cleared to push back 270 at 8, Marcus confirmed. He turned to Peterson. Let's fly. The aircraft began its slow backward roll from the gate, guided by the ground crew. Marcus felt the familiar tension in his shoulders ease. Up here he was in control. Up here his race didn't matter, if only he'd known what the next 3 hours would bring. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the cabin settled into the hushed anticipation that precedes takeoff. Flight attendants completed their final checks. Passengers thumbed through magazines or gazed out windows at the sprawling Chicago landscape. In row 14, Eleanor Porter noticed Richard Kensington across the aisle, recognizing him from newspaper photographs. She observed how the airline executive kept checking his watch impatiently. "First time flying, coach?" she asked with a gentle smile. Kensington looked up, surprised at being addressed. "I beg your pardon? I couldn't help but notice you seem uncomfortable," Eleanor continued pleasantly. "I was just wondering if this was your first time in economy class." "I'm the CEO of this airline, madam," Kensington replied stiffly. "I'm simply conducting a quality control assessment." "Oh, how wonderful," Eleanor said. "Then you must be very proud of Captain Washington. He was my student many years ago. Brilliant mind, always knew he'd do something exceptional." Kensington's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "You taught him?" "Seventh grade English, back in Detroit. He was the kind of student teachers dream about, curious, hardworking, determined." "And now he's flying us to Denver." Her eyes twinkled. "Makes me feel a bit safer knowing who's at the controls." Before Kensington could respond, the aircraft stopped at the threshold of the runway. Marcus' voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Marcus Washington. On behalf of myself, First Officer Peterson, and our cabin crew, welcome aboard Transcontinental Airways Flight 457 to Denver. Our flying time today will be approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. Weather looks good, though we might encounter some turbulence over Nebraska. We're currently number 3 for takeoff, so we should be in the air shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are in their upright position. Flight attendants prepare for takeoff." "Because I have faith," Eleanor replied simply, "in God and in that young man flying this plane." The aircraft lurched violently, drawing gasps from throughout the cabin. Overhead bins popped open in several places, spilling contents into the aisles. An unused oxygen mask dropped from its compartment. In the cockpit, Marcus fought to maintain their descent path with just one engine. The controls were sluggish, the aircraft constantly wanting to yaw toward the dead engine side. Every movement required strength and precision. 5,000 feet, Peterson called out, monitoring their altitude. "Lakeside Field in sight, 10 o'clock. Through breaks in the clouds, Marcus could see the small airport below. A single runway stretched across the landscape, with minimal terminal facilities visible nearby. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, the thunder audible even over the remaining engine's roar. "Landing gear down," Marcus ordered. Peterson complied, and they felt the reassuring thunk of the landing gear deploying. The instrument panel showed 3 green lights, all gear successfully down and locked. "Flaps 30, Marcus continued. The aircraft shuddered as the flaps extended, increasing drag but also providing crucial lift at their reduced speed. "Transcontinental 457, Lakeside Tower," a new voice crackled over the radio. "You are cleared to land runway 27, winds 310 at 18 gusts 25, emergency vehicles in position." "Transcontinental 457 cleared to land," Marcus confirmed. They broke through the lowest layer of clouds, and the runway appeared directly ahead. Rain streamed across the windscreen, partially obscuring visibility. The single engine strained as Marcus carefully maintained their glide path. "And now we return to where we started. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Marcus' normally steady voice wavered slightly over the intercom as the plane lurched again. "We're experiencing severe turbulence and have lost one engine. I need everyone to remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened." A collective gasp filled the cabin as the aircraft dropped suddenly, like an elevator with snapped cables. Oxygen masks deployed, dangling like yellow orchids above terrified faces. The floor trembled beneath their feet. In the cockpit, Marcus gripped the controls, his dark hands steady despite the chaos. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The altimeter was dropping too quickly. Sweat beaded on his brow as he made split-second calculations. "Sir, we need to divert now," First Officer Peterson urged, his face pale. "Denver's too far with this weather and one engine." Marcus glanced at the radar showing the massive storm system. The small regional airport to their left was their only option, but he knew what awaited him there. The same town where, just 5 years earlier, he'd been denied service at a restaurant. The same town where his father had once been beaten for looking a white man in the eye. In seat 14C, Eleanor Porter, a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, clutched her rosary. Across the aisle, Richard Kensington, the airline's aging owner and CEO, white-knuckled the armrests, his usual composure shattered. "We're all going to die because they let a black man fly this plane," Richard shouted to no one in particular, loud enough for several rows to hear. Marcus' voice came through the speakers again, resolute now. "This is Captain Washington. I've made the decision to divert to Lakeside Regional Airport. We will be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Trust me, I will get you home safely." The plane banked hard to the left, the failing engines screaming in protest. A flight attendant was thrown against the bulkhead, blood streaming from her forehead. Below them, lightning cracked across the darkened landscape, illuminating the small town of Lakeside, a place where Marcus had sworn never to set foot again. Richard Kensington's face contorted with rage and fear. "This is a death sentence," he spat. But Marcus Washington had made his choice. The lives of everyone aboard depended on him landing this crippled aircraft in the one place he feared most. The plane descended through violent air currents, the ground rushing up to meet them. The runway threshold passed beneath them as Marcus fought the crosswind, keeping the aircraft aligned with one engine. The plane touched down hard, bouncing slightly before settling onto the wet tarmac. Immediately, Marcus deployed the thrust reverser on the functioning engine and applied maximum braking. "Spoilers deployed," Peterson called out, his voice tense but controlled. The aircraft shuddered and groaned as it decelerated along the runway, rain still pelting the windscreen. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they might run out of runway, but gradually the plane slowed to a manageable taxi speed. "Transcontinental 457, confirm you are able to taxi to the apron?" the tower controller asked. "Affirmative," Marcus replied, his voice steady once more. "Taxiing to the apron." As they turned off the active runway, Marcus keyed the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. We are safely on the ground at Lakeside Regional Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach our parking position and the engines are shut down. I want to thank you for your cooperation during this emergency landing." Relief flooded the cabin. Some passengers applauded spontaneously, others wept quietly. Sophia moved to check on Jennifer, who had been thrown against the bulkhead during the turbulence and was sporting a nasty gash on her forehead. "I'm okay," Jennifer insisted, though she looked pale. "Just a bump." In row 14, Alina Porter finally released her tight grip on her rosary. "I knew he could do it," she said softly. Across the aisle, Richard Kensington sat in stunned silence, his earlier outburst hanging in the air like a bad odor. Several nearby passengers were giving him cold, disgusted looks. Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside his boss. "Sir," he ventured carefully, "perhaps we should discuss how the company will handle this incident. The emergency response, passenger accommodations." Kensington nodded absently, his gaze fixed on the cockpit door at the front of the cabin. The aircraft came to a complete stop on the small airport's apron. Emergency vehicles surrounded them, red lights flashing through the rain. Marcus completed the shutdown checklist and finally allowed his shoulders to slump slightly in relief and exhaustion. "You did it, sir," Peterson said quietly. "That was incredible flying." Marcus gave the young first officer a tired smile. "We did it, Peterson. Teamwork." He unbuckled his harness and stood. "Now comes the hard part, getting 156 stranded passengers situated in a town with one motel and no rental cars." As they opened the cockpit door, Sophia was waiting in the galley. "Captain, we have a passenger with a head injury. Jennifer took a fall during the approach. And the mother with twins is having an anxiety attack. Otherwise, everyone's shaken but okay." "Thanks, Sophia. I'll make an announcement about our situation, then we can start deplaning. Is ground crew bringing stairs?" "They're positioning them now. It's still raining pretty hard out there." Marcus nodded and picked up the intercom handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Washington again. First, I want to assure you that our aircraft is secure and there is no further danger. We've landed at Lakeside Regional Airport due to our engine emergency. This is a small regional facility without some of the amenities you might be accustomed to at larger airports." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Transcontinental Airways will arrange alternative transportation to Denver as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we ask for your patience. Our flight attendants will provide more information as it becomes available. We'll begin deplaning shortly using mobile stairs. Please be careful as it's still raining outside." As Marcus finished his announcement, Richard Kensington rose from his seat and moved deliberately toward the front of the aircraft. Several passengers tried to stand as well, but Sophia's firm voice cut through the cabin. "Please remain seated until we're ready to deplane. Thank you for your cooperation." Kensington ignored her, continuing to the galley where Marcus now stood with Peterson and David. "Captain Washington," Kensington said, his voice tightly controlled. "A word." Marcus met the CEO's gaze directly. "Mr. Kensington, I'm a bit busy managing an emergency situation at the moment." I'm well aware of the situation, Kensington replied. I want to know why you chose this, backwater as our diversion airport when there were other options available. Marcus' expression remained professional, though his jaw tightened slightly. Sir, with all due respect, this was the nearest suitable airport given our single-engine status and the deteriorating weather. Every minute in the air increased our risk. There's a military airbase less than 50 miles from here, Kensington countered, which would have required us to fly directly through the worst of the storm system, Marcus explained patiently. I made the decision that prioritized passenger safety above all other considerations. From behind Kensington, a leaner porter's voice cut in. Perhaps you should thank the captain for saving your life, Mr. Kensington, instead of questioning his judgment. All eyes turned to the elderly woman who had appeared in the galley, leaning on her cane but radiating surprising authority. With all due respect, madam, Kensington began. My name is Alina Porter, she interrupted. I taught this man when he was 12 years old. Even then, he showed better judgment than most adults I knew. Her eyes flashed with indignation. And I heard what you said during the landing approach, about a black man flying this plane. Shameful. Kensington had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but quickly recovered his corporate demeanor. Mrs. Porter, while I appreciate your concern, this is a company matter That what? She challenged. That shouldn't be discussed in front of the man who just saved all our lives, including yours. She took a step closer to Kensington. I'm old enough to remember when people like you wouldn't let people like Marcus drink from the same water fountain. And here he is, responsible for your very breath right now. If that doesn't humble you, sir, I don't know what will. The galley fell silent. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face carefully neutral despite the emotional storm her words had triggered. Peterson looked at his captain with new understanding dawning in his eyes. The silence was broken by Sophia. Captain, the stairs are in position. We can begin deplaning. Marcus nodded. Thank you, Sophia. To Kensington, he simply said, If you'll excuse me, sir, I have passengers to attend to. As Marcus turned to leave, Kensington surprised everyone by placing a hand on the captain's arm. Washington. His voice was quieter now, less certain. The landing, it was well executed. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Marcus gave a curt nod of acknowledgement before moving toward the aircraft door. Outside, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Emergency vehicles still surrounded the aircraft, their lights painting the wet tarmac in flashes of red and white. A small group of airport personnel waited at the bottom of the stairs, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the unexpected arrival of a commercial airliner. As the passengers began to deplane, Marcus stood at the door, offering a reassuring word to each person. Many thanked him with tears in their eyes. Others simply clasped his hand wordlessly. The mother with twins paused before him, her children clinging to her legs. I thought we were going to die, she admitted quietly. Thank you for bringing us down safely. Just doing my job, ma'am, Marcus replied with gentle humility. No, she said firmly. It was more than that. My husband is a pilot too military like you were. I know what it takes, what you did up there. She shook her head, unable to find adequate words. One of her twins looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. Are you a superhero? The boy asked in all seriousness. Despite his exhaustion, Marcus smiled. No, buddy, just a pilot who loves his job. As the deplaning continued, Sophia approached Marcus. The station manager says there's one motel in town with 40 rooms, obviously not enough for everyone. What about buses to Denver? Marcus asked. They're working on it, but the earliest they could get here would be tomorrow morning. The storm has closed some roads. Marcus sighed. All right, let's prioritize rooms for families with children, elderly passengers, and anyone with medical needs. The rest of us can sleep in the terminal if necessary. The small lakeside regional terminal building was never designed to accommodate 156 stranded passengers. Its single waiting area with perhaps 30 plastic chairs was quickly overwhelmed. The lone food vendor, a coffee cart operated by a startled teenager, had run out of supplies within an hour. As evening approached, the situation grew increasingly tense. Many passengers were hungry, tired, and frustrated by the lack of information. The local motel had sent a single shuttle van that could transport only 8 passengers at a time, creating a bottleneck in the evacuation process. Marcus had removed his pilot's jacket, but kept his captain's shirt and epaulets, maintaining a visible symbol of authority and reassurance for the passengers. He worked tirelessly alongside his crew, organizing passengers into groups, relaying information, and personally calling Transcontinental's operations center for updates. Richard Kensington, meanwhile, sat in a corner of the terminal, engaged in heated phone conversations with various executives. His initial anger had given way to a more practical focus on managing the crisis, though he still maintained his distance from Marcus. Alina Porter had been among the first to be assigned a motel room due to her age, but she had steadfastly refused to leave. "I'm not going anywhere until I know everyone is taken care of," she informed Sophia firmly. "Besides, I'm tougher than I look." As the evening wore on, the small airport's limitations became increasingly problematic. The restrooms were overwhelmed, the terminal was growing cold as the air conditioning struggled to handle the unusual number of occupants, and patience was wearing thin. Michael Townsend, the pharmaceutical salesman, approached Marcus. "Captain, I travel through this region regularly. There's a conference center about 15 miles from here that might be able to accommodate people. They have meeting rooms with plenty of space, at least." Marcus looked at him with interest. "Do you have a contact there?" "Better than that," Michael replied. "I have the director's personal cell phone. We've done several events there." "Make the call," Marcus decided. "If they can help, we'll find a way to transport people." While Michael stepped away to make his call, Jennifer approached with an update on her injury. The cut on her forehead had been cleaned and bandaged by a local paramedic. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked with concern. "I've had worse paper cuts," Jennifer assured him with a brave smile, though the bruising around the wound suggested otherwise. "But I'm worried about those twins. They're getting hungry and the mother is at her wit's end." Marcus frowned, thinking, there must be a grocery store in town if we could get someone there. "I already suggested that," Jennifer said, "but apparently there's some hesitation from the locals about helping." She lowered her voice. "The sheriff is outside. Doesn't seem particularly eager to assist." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He knew exactly why the local authorities might be reluctant to help. Lakeside had a long history of racial tensions, and an aircraft full of diverse passengers from Chicago was probably not receiving a warm welcome. "I'll talk to him," Marcus decided. "Captain," Jennifer said hesitantly, "maybe someone else should know." Marcus cut in gently. "This is my responsibility. These are my passengers." Outside the terminal, Sheriff Dale Harmon leaned against his patrol car, watching the activity with narrow eyes. A heavy-set man in his 50s with a weathered face and a perpetual scowl, Harmon represented the old guard of Lakeside's power structure. He straightened as Marcus approached. "Captain," the sheriff acknowledged with minimal courtesy. "Quite a situation you've brought to our little town." "Not by choice, I assure you," Marcus replied evenly. "Sheriff, we have families with children who need food and proper shelter. We need your assistance." Sheriff Harmon shrugged. "Town's resources are limited. The motel's doing what it can." "That's not enough," Marcus pressed. "Surely there are churches, community centers, school gymnasiums that could be opened temporarily." "On whose authority?" Harmon asked, a challenging edge to his voice. "This is a local matter now, and I decide how local resources are allocated." Marcus maintained his composure, though it took considerable effort. "Sheriff, these are American citizens who've experienced a traumatic event. They need help regardless of who they are or where they're from." Harmon's expression hardened. "I remember you, from a few years back, that fancy car coming through town like you owned the place." "I was passing through and stopped for dinner," Marcus corrected him quietly. "Nothing more." "Well, now you've brought a whole plane load of city folks to our doorstep." The sheriff pushed himself away from his car. "I'll tell you what I told you then. Lakeside takes care of its own. Everyone else is just passing through." Before Marcus could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Richard Kensington approached, his corporate authority evident in his bearing despite his rumpled appearance. "Sheriff Harmon, I presume?" Kensington extended his hand. "Richard Kensington, CEO of Transcontinental Airways. I understand your community is being inconvenienced by our emergency landing, and I want to assure you that my company will compensate the town appropriately." Harmon's demeanor shifted subtly as he shook Kensington's hand. "Just doing my job, Mr. Kensington, trying to maintain order in an unusual situation." "Of course," Kensington replied smoothly. "And I'm sure you understand that as the CEO of a major corporation, I have certain expectations about how my customers are treated. These passengers represent millions in annual revenue to Transcontinental. Their comfort and safety are my primary concern." The implied threat in Kensington's words wasn't lost on Harmon. The sheriff's expression soured, but he nodded reluctantly. "I suppose I could call the mayor about opening the high school gym, and the diner might be persuaded to prepare some food." "Excellent," Kensington said, as if the matter were settled. "Captain Washington here will coordinate with your team. I'm sure you'll find him highly efficient." With that, Kensington gave Marcus a significant look and walked back toward the terminal, leaving the captain and the sheriff in an awkward silence. Finally, Harmon spoke. "I'll make those calls, but I want your people out of my town by tomorrow noon." "Thank you, Sheriff," Marcus replied professionally. "We'll do everything we can to accommodate that timeline." As the sheriff moved away to his patrol car, Marcus stood for a moment in the drizzling rain, processing what had just happened. Kensington, of all people, had intervened on behalf of the passengers. It was unexpected, to say the least. Inside the terminal, the mood had improved slightly with Michael Townsend's news that the conference center was willing to accommodate up to 60 people in their meeting rooms. Transportation remained an issue, but it was a step forward. Eleanor Porter had organized a group of older women passengers into an impromptu comfort committee, distributing the limited blankets and pillows that the airport had provided and offering emotional support to those who were struggling. "Marcus," she called as he re-entered the terminal. "Any progress with the sheriff?" "Some," Marcus acknowledged. "He's contacting the mayor about opening the high school gym and possibly getting food from the local diner." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "I sense a but in your tone," Marcus sighed. "Let's just say Sheriff Harmon and I have a history, a brief one, but not positive." "Because you're black," Eleanor stated matter-of-factly, not a question. "Yes," Eleanor shook her head sadly. "Some things change too slowly." She patted his arm. "But some things do change. Remember when you couldn't have been a pilot at all, and now look at you." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion at the terminal entrance drew their attention. A group of local residents was arriving, led by a middle-aged woman in a diner uniform. They carried large containers of food, trays of sandwiches, and cases of bottled water. "Well, I'll be," Eleanor murmured. "Looks like dinner has arrived." The woman in the diner uniform approached Marcus. "Captain, I'm Sarah Livingston. I own the Lakeside Diner. Heard you folks were stranded with no food." She gestured to the supplies. "It's not fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." Marcus was momentarily speechless. "Ms. Livingston, this is incredibly generous. Thank you." Sarah shrugged. "Sheriff Harmon called, said we should help out, but truth is we were already loading up the van when he called." She lowered her voice. "Some of us in Lakeside don't share the sheriff's views on hospitality." As the food was distributed to grateful passengers, Marcus noticed Richard Kensington standing apart, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. The CEO made eye contact briefly, then motioned for Marcus to join him in a quieter corner of the terminal. "Captain Washington," Kensington began when Marcus approached. "I've been on the phone with our operations team. They're sending buses first thing in the morning, and we've chartered 2 small commuter aircraft to land here tomorrow and transport the most urgent cases." "That's good news, sir," Marcus acknowledged. Kensington hesitated, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I also want to address what happened earlier. My comment during the landing approach was inappropriate." It wasn't quite an apology, but Marcus recognized the effort it took for Kensington to even acknowledge the incident. "We were all under extreme stress, sir." "That's not an excuse," Kensington replied unexpectedly. "I've spent 50 years in this industry, Washington. I've seen it change, sometimes against my better judgment." He glanced around the terminal at the diverse group of passengers. "Today, I saw something I can't ignore. Sir, I saw a pilot, a captain, who put aside personal history and potential danger to do what was right for his passengers." Kensington met Marcus' gaze directly. "You could have chosen the military base despite the weather risk. It would have been defensible, but you chose to land here in a town you knew might be hostile to you personally because it was safer for everyone on board." Marcus was silent, surprised by Kensington's insight. "That's the kind of judgment I want in my pilots," Kensington continued. "Regardless of," he waved his hand vaguely, "other factors." It was as close to a complete change of heart as the old CEO was likely to express. Marcus nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. "Thank you, sir, but it wasn't just me. Peterson performed admirably for a new first officer, and the cabin crew was exceptional." "Yes, I've noticed," Kensington agreed. "Particularly that young woman with the head injury, Jennifer, is it? Still working despite her own discomfort." "That's Jennifer Lewis, yes, first year with the company." Kensington nodded thoughtfully. "I'll make note of that." He straightened his posture, reverting to his CEO demeanor. "Now about tomorrow's evacuation plan." As they discussed logistics, Marcus caught sight of Eleanor Porter watching them from across the room, a knowing smile on her face. The night progressed slowly for the stranded passengers of Flight 457. The high school gymnasium was indeed opened, providing floor space and basic comfort for those who couldn't be accommodated at the motel or conference center. Local churches contributed blankets and pillows. The diner sent 2 more batches of food as the night wore on. By midnight, most passengers had found some place to rest, if not sleep comfortably. Marcus and his crew rotated shifts, ensuring that a uniformed presence was always available to answer questions and provide reassurance. Around 2 a.m., Marcus took a brief break, stepping outside the terminal for some fresh air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear night sky filled with stars, the kind of visibility rarely seen near cities with their light pollution. He wasn't alone for long. Alina Porter joined him, wrapped in a borrowed blanket against the night chill. "You should be resting, Mrs. Porter," Marcus said gently. "It's been a long day." "I've never needed much sleep," she replied, "especially not when there's something worth watching." "The stars?" Marcus asked, glancing upward. "No," Alina smiled. "You seeing what you've become." She settled onto a bench outside the terminal door. "When you were in my class, you wrote an essay about wanting to fly. Do you remember?" Marcus nodded. "I do. You gave me a book about the Tuskegee Airmen afterward." "Because I knew you could do it," Alina said simply. "I've taught hundreds of children over the years, Marcus. Some had talent, some had determination. Rarely did I see both in such measure as I saw in you." She paused, gazing up at the stars. "But I wondered if the world would let you succeed." "It hasn't always been easy," Marcus admitted. "Of course not. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Alina adjusted her blanket. "But today I saw something remarkable. I saw Richard Kensington, a man who represents everything that once stood in your way, come to recognize your value." "I'm not sure he's had a complete change of heart," Marcus cautioned. "People rarely do all at once," Alina agreed. "But seeds were planted today. In him, in that young first officer who watched you handle an impossible situation with grace, in those twins who saw a black man as their hero." She reached out and patted his hand. "That's how change happens, Marcus. One person, one moment, one emergency landing at a time." Marcus chuckled despite his fatigue. "Is that what they taught you in teachers' college?" "No," Alina replied with a twinkle in her eye. "That's what life taught me, and what you reminded me of today." Inside the terminal, most passengers were asleep in various states of discomfort on chairs, floors, and makeshift beds. Jennifer Lewis sat with the mother of twins, who had finally managed to get her children to sleep. The young flight attendant's bandaged forehead looked painful in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "You should get some rest," Michael Townsend said, approaching with a cup of coffee he'd managed to find for her. "You've been on your feet all day." Jennifer accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks, I will soon. Just want to make sure everyone's settled first." Michael sat down next to her, wincing slightly as he stretched his bad knee. "Funny how a crisis changes things, isn't it? This morning I was furious about a seat assignment. Seems pretty trivial now." "Perspective is a powerful thing," Jennifer agreed. "What about you? Why aren't you resting?" "Too much on my mind," Michael admitted. "When that plane was going down, all I could think about was all the things I haven't done yet, all the time I've wasted chasing commissions instead of, I don't know, living." Jennifer nodded understandingly. "My mom had cancer last year, terminal diagnosis. Then miraculously she went into remission. She told me the diagnosis was the best thing that ever happened to her in a way, made her realize what mattered." "And what was that?" Michael asked. "Connections, love, being present." Jennifer sipped her coffee. "She quit her corporate job and opened a flower shop, makes a quarter of what she used to, but she says she's never been happier." Michael was quiet for a moment. "My brother, after his heart attack, he said something similar. But I didn't really hear him, you know, too busy with the next sales call." "Well," Jennifer said gently, "sometimes we need a plane to almost crash before we really listen." Across the terminal, Richard Kensington sat alone, still working on his tablet despite the late hour. He looked up as David Kim approached with a cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this, sir," David offered. "It's from my personal thermos, actually hot unlike what they're serving now." Kensington accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You're the senior flight attendant, aren't you, Kim?" "Yes, sir, 15 years with Transcontinental. You've seen a lot of changes in the company then." David nodded. "I have, some good, some challenging, but I've always been proud to wear the uniform." Kensington considered this. "Even on days like today?" "Especially on days like today," David replied without hesitation. "When it matters most." As dawn broke over Lakeside, the evacuation plan began to take shape. The promised buses arrived shortly after 7 a.m., lined up outside the small terminal. 2 commuter aircraft landed around the same time, small but welcome sights for the stranded passengers. Marcus had slept barely 2 hours, but adrenaline and responsibility kept him functioning. He organized the passenger manifests, prioritizing those with connecting flights and urgent commitments for the first departures. By mid-morning, more than half the passengers had been transported out of Lakeside. The mood had lightened considerably with daylight, food, and the concrete evidence of rescue. Even Sheriff Harmon seemed less hostile, though he made frequent pointed inquiries about the remaining evacuation timeline. The mother with twins approached Marcus as she prepared to board one of the buses. "Captain Washington," she said, her children clinging to her hands. "I just wanted to say thank you again. My husband has been frantic with worry, but we've been in good hands." "You're very welcome, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Safe travels to Denver." One of the twins looked up at him with solemn eyes. "Are you going to fix your airplane and fly it again?" Marcus smiled and crouched down to the boy's level. "Not this time, buddy. Maintenance crews will come and make the repairs, but I'll be flying again soon, just on a different airplane." "I want to be a pilot too," the child declared. "A brave one like you." "You will be," Marcus assured him. "Study hard, especially math and science, and never let anyone tell you what you can't do." As the family boarded the bus, Marcus stood and found Richard Kensington watching the exchange. "You're good with children," the CEO observed. "I wouldn't have expected that." "There's probably a lot about me you wouldn't expect, sir," Marcus replied evenly. Kensington acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "I'm heading out on the next commuter flight to Denver. I've got a board meeting I can't miss." He extended his hand. "You'll stay until the last passenger is evacuated?" "Of course," Marcus confirmed, shaking the offered hand. "That's what I thought." Kensington hesitated, then added, "There's a meeting next month about the future direction of our pilot recruitment and advancement programs. I'd like you to attend, Captain Washington. Your perspective might be valuable." It was a small gesture, but significant coming from Kensington. Marcus nodded. "I'll be there, sir." As Kensington walked away, a leaner porter appeared at Marcus' side. "Well, well," she remarked, "miracles do happen. Let's not overstate things," Marcus cautioned with a small smile. "But it's a start." "A start is all we ever get," Elena replied wisely. "The rest is up to us." She glanced at her watch. "My bus leaves in 20 minutes. Walk an old lady to her chariot." "With pleasure, Mrs. Porter." As they walked slowly toward the waiting buses, Elena said, "You know, I'm going to tell my granddaughter all about you, about the brave pilot who saved her grandmother's life. She'll grow up knowing that heroes come in all colors." "I'm no hero," Marcus demurred. "Just doing my job." "Sometimes doing your job against all odds is the most heroic act possible," Elena countered. "Especially when the odds have been stacked against you your whole life." They reached the bus where the driver was helping passengers with their luggage. Elena turned to face Marcus fully. "I'm proud of you, Marcus Washington, not just for yesterday, but for all the yesterdays that brought you to that cockpit, for every slight you endured, every barrier you broke, every time you refused to let someone else's prejudice define you." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "I had good teachers." "And now you're the teacher," Elena said, patting his cheek affectionately. "Teaching by example. The best kind." She allowed him to help her up the bus steps, then turned back. "Visit me in Denver sometime. Meet my daughter and grandbaby. They should know the man who made sure I lived to see them." "I'd like that," Marcus replied sincerely. By early afternoon, the last of the passengers had departed Lakeside. Only the flight crew remained, along with the disabled aircraft that sat on the tarmac awaiting maintenance teams from Chicago. Marcus stood with Peterson, Sophia, Jennifer, and David, watching the final bus pull away. "Well," Sophia sighed, "that was certainly a flight to remember." "In 25 years of flying, I've never experienced anything quite like it," Marcus admitted. "Not just the emergency," David clarified. "The whole thing, this town, Kensington, everything." Jennifer, her forehead still bandaged but her spirit undimmed, nodded in agreement. "Do you think anything will really change, Captain?" "With Kensington, I mean?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think change is rarely sudden or complete, but sometimes when people are pushed outside their comfort zones, when they're forced to confront their prejudices in moments of crisis, small shifts happen. And small shifts can lead to bigger ones," Peterson added thoughtfully. "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "When I started flying, I couldn't have imagined being a captain for a major airline. Each small change, each barrier broken, made the next one possible." A car approached from the terminal, their ride to the small hotel where they would stay overnight before departing the next morning. As they gathered their few belongings, Marcus took one last look at the aircraft that had brought them to this unexpected crossroads. "You know," he said quietly, "when I realized we had to land here in Lakeside of all places, I thought it was the worst possible outcome." "And now?" Sophia asked. Marcus smiled. "Now I think perhaps it was exactly where we all needed to be." As the crew departed Lakeside Regional Airport, the sun broke fully through the clouds, illuminating the disabled aircraft in a warm golden light, a silent sentinel of the transformative journey that had touched all their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated when they boarded in Chicago just one day earlier. In the months that followed, the events of Flight 457 would ripple outward in unexpected ways. Richard Kensington did indeed invite Marcus to that recruitment meeting, which led to a new company-wide initiative to increase diversity in the cockpit. Kensington didn't become a crusader for equality overnight, but he did begin to recognize the value of different perspectives and experiences in his company. Jennifer Lewis and Michael Townsend stayed in touch after the flight, their connection forged in crisis blossoming into something more. Michael eventually left pharmaceutical sales to work for a nonprofit healthcare organization, less money, but as he often said, a far richer life. First Officer Peterson would go on to become one of Transcontinental's youngest captains, crediting Marcus Washington's mentorship as the foundation of his success. He made a point of visiting schools in underserved communities, showing children of all backgrounds that the sky held possibilities for them too. Eleanor Porter did indeed tell her granddaughter about the brave black pilot who landed a crippled plane in a storm. As the child grew, Eleanor would take her to air shows and flight museums, nurturing a passion for aviation that would eventually lead the girl to flight school herself. And Marcus Washington, he continued to fly, to break barriers, to show by example what courage and determination could achieve. The emergency landing at Lakeside became part of company training not just for the technical aspects of the engine failure, but for the human elements as well. The decisions made not despite personal history, but because of it. On the anniversary of Flight 457, Marcus received a letter from the town of Lakeside. The mayor wrote to inform him that Sheriff Harmon had retired, and the town had elected its first black council member. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. The letter concluded with an invitation for Marcus to visit any time, not as a pilot in an emergency, but as an honored guest. Marcus kept that letter in his flight bag, a reminder that sometimes the most challenging landings lead to the most important destinations. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.